Welcome home to St. Anne's.
Alright.
We want you to know that
This
you're
is
welcome
what I
to
love
join
and like
us
call
at 10 a.m.
feminists
on Sundays.
It's my favorite.
Please be sure to hit subscribe to receive our
And I'll
sermons.
tell you why
We
I call
can't
it
wait
that.
to meet you.
Because if you didn't pick up from our readings, this is Mary's Sunday. This is a Sunday that we talk about Mary. I know often we think it's the Pink Sunday. I don't know where that comes from. It's not. It's really strange. Everyone's like, oh, the Pink Sunday is Marian Sunday. I'm like, no. Marian Sunday is the fourth Sunday. It's the Sunday when we hear about Mary. And what I love about our readings is that it's not focused on all the stuff that we've been taught about Mary. We focus on who Mary actually was, the things that she said, her actual beliefs, and her behaviors. And that's a really big thing. And I'll tell you why Mary is so important to me. So, and I go through this. So if you've heard this sermon, it's roughly the same sermon every single year. So my apologies if you've heard it before. Some of the themes will be very similar. Many of you know that when I was a kid, I went to Roman Catholic schools. Not because my family was Roman Catholic. It was strictly because the schools were better. My dad, a politician at the time, got really mad because there wasn't school choice, and they said that we had to go to this school that he didn't like, and he was like, no. And he said, I'll send my kids to the Roman Catholic school, and they said, John, you would never do that. Well, so both my sister and I have Roman Catholic education until 6th grade. And I know we have some recovering Catholics in here. I'm going to tell you, I love all Episcopalians, but the best Episcopalians are former Roman Catholics. Seriously. But if you are familiar with Roman Catholic Church, the teachings on Mary are saccharine at best. For example, I think I was in 3rd grade. Between 3rd and 4th, I think, when they decided that all the girls were coming of age. Well, yeah, did you not know that that's when you get a soul? Did you guys not know that? No, nobody has a soul until you're 8. That's when you can make decisions. Well, no, that's different. That's so you don't go to hell. No, y'all. No. Okay, did you know, not only do I have Roman Catholic elementary education, but I also have a degree in medieval studies. So, it's disturbing what I know. I'm kind of useless unless you're in a cocktail party, in which case, I'm a great time. But someday we'll talk about why you get a soul at 8 and why you have to be baptized when you're born so you don't go to hell. None of those hold in the Episcopal Church, so please know. It technically doesn't in the Catholic Church either, but they still perpetuate these myths. I know. There's what the Roman Catholic actually teaches and their theology and what the Pope says versus what is on the ground and going around. The two are very different things. But as we're coming into our femininity, and it's really time that you better start indoctrinating these girls before they make different choices. There was a convent, I don't know, half a mile away or whatever. And they had a big white statue of the Virgin Mary because, we're very worried about that. Just so you know, virgin in Scripture does not have anything to do with any sort of sexual thing. It's just an age thing. It means young, unmarried, because they weren't worried about some of that stuff at the time. But we get very worried about that when it comes to the Middle Ages. Write this one down. We'll have this conversation again later, too. Okay. Anyway, so they make all the girls wear these white robes, and they put flowers on her head. And we danced around the Virgin Mary. Now, I was born a feminist. There was never a point in my history at which I would respond positively to this experience. But I imagine you can think of what I thought about all of these things. It wasn't a positive thing. So I'll be honest, I couldn't stand Mary. I couldn't. I completely rejected her. I was like, this is absurd. We are being manipulated by this tool that the church is using to manipulate how girls behave and are seen in the world, right? Because already at that time, remember, I'm an Episcopalian. I hadn't had my calling to the priesthood, but like I was into churchy sorts of things, and I had a lot of issues with a lot of these things. So could not stand Mary. I'll be honest, I just couldn't. I completely rejected everything. And then I got to college. And I actually spent time in Scripture and studying Scripture. Would you believe that the Mary that you and I are so often offered up is completely absent from Scripture? Completely. In fact, if we go into Scripture and look at what Mary was actually saying and doing, we're going to find a whole different thing. And this is so very, very important. Because what so often happens in the church is we allow it to get whitewashed and cleaned up by somebody else, and it gets used as a tool to manipulate us. And we get turned into these cutesy, saccharine people, right? The same thing happens to Jesus, right? Jesus rides a unicorn and does nice things, unless, of course, Jesus rides an American eagle, a screeching American eagle with an AR. That's the other thing that sometimes happens. Because, I'll be honest, we don't spend enough time in Scripture. And we in the church have allowed other people to tell us what is going on, because we don't spend the time to actually do it. So today, we're going to do it. We're going to talk about who Mary actually was in Scripture, what we have about her, and how it's very, very important. So let's start with this story, because I think it's important to note, in Advent, men are silent. Zechariah is forced into mutism as soon as Elizabeth becomes pregnant. And bro ain't allowed to talk until the baby's born. Joseph does not have a line in Scripture. The Father does not speak. Advent is brought to us by women who are silenced throughout time. And when Elizabeth and Mary get together, do they talk about colic and, how they're feeling in their pregnancy or any of that? No. That's not what they talk about. What do they say? What does Mary say? What does Elizabeth say? We are agents of God. And how incredible is it that you and I are the people that God brings forth his prophecy through? And Mary goes a step further. She's a brilliant theologian, and you have to realize that what she is quoting here is Scripture throughout time. She doesn't just come up. Now, don't get me wrong, this is pretty rough. Even absent of that. But you have to realize that not only is she saying, just turning the tables on things, she's referencing Scripture and theology from throughout time. She says, God has ripped down the mighty from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. Advent is about tearing things down that you and I are accustomed to, that you and I have just accepted as that's the way the world is, and lifting up a whole new way of being. It is about completely rejecting what society has said is true, and creating a whole new society that God calls us to. That's huge. That is huge. Because these women get it. And it is these women that will raise their sons. It is not the fathers who will raise their sons. And in the church, I'm going to tell you, it is the women who raise the church. And I don't care how strong the patriarchy is, how strong misogyny is or anything. Go to any church. Go to any church. Who gets everybody there? Who gets everything done? It is always the women of the church. In the Roman Catholic Church, you don't mess with the ladies of the church. In the Episcopal Church, you don't mess with altar guild. There is not a priest ordained who doesn't know to not mess with the ECW. Like, you just know who is doing it. And it has been that way throughout time. It's the Jewish mothers. It's a matrilineal line. Throughout time, God has chosen the people that we think God would never choose. Always, throughout time. And this isn't strictly about women. It is about us rejecting what society has told us is true. Society tells us it is this group of people who are in power. It is this group of people who get the say. It is this group of people who will continue the power and the lineage and all those things. And then God says, absolutely not. And we try and clean it up, right? We silence it. We say, well, I bet she had blonde hair, and I bet she wore blue silk all the time. I bet she was real nice. But Mary was real nice. And then but don't actually go into Scripture and see what Mary said or did. Because if you go into Scripture and see what Mary said or did, you'll find that, she said the Magnificat. You'll find that every time something happens with Jesus, not only is she there, she ponders these things in her heart. She's there every step of the way. And she speaks every step of the way. And let me tell you, in Scripture, when somebody speaks, you pay attention. When somebody gets a name and gets a line, it's important. Because so often in Scripture, we don't have that, right? We just have a person who is there, and, that's important. But in Scripture, when somebody speaks, pay attention. Every single time that Mary's in Scripture, she speaks. And she never says something pathetic and, whatever you say, Joseph, yeah, you're a real good guy. Thanks. I'll stay home. You go out and teach Jesus to be a carpenter. That is not what happens. When you go into Scripture, she says the Magnificat. She goes to see her cousin on her own to have this moment. Zechariah, he's muted. Like literally, God mutes Zechariah. He does not get to say anything until after John is born. Because they're like, well, you're going to name the baby Zechariah. And he's like, you do whatever Elizabeth tells you to do. You name that baby whatever Elizabeth tells you. That's what ends up happening. So my question for you is, because you and I in the church have allowed the same thing to happen. We have allowed Christianity and us to be defined by somebody who never spent time in Scripture. We have allowed ourselves to be made cute and nice and all sorts of stuff that never actually was anything that you and I were called to be by God. It was something that society decided for us. I challenge us. I challenge us today to accept an Advent where we turn the tables, where we say what God is actually doing in our lives, who God actually calls us to be. What does that actually look like? It probably doesn't look the way that society tells us the Christian church looks. When you go into Scripture, when you go into your hearts, when you ponder these things in your heart, what does God say? What's actually there? Probably not for you to shut up and be nice. Probably not. probably to speak out, to turn the tables, to bring in a whole new way of being. So I challenge us. If a woman at this time, 2 women actually, if these women at this time can do these things, what are you and I capable of doing today? Well, so please do not ask me to wear a robe and flowers on my head. I ain't going to do it. And if you ask me to dance, you're
welcome
for
to
it.
join us at 10 a.m. on Sundays. Please be sure to hit subscribe to receive our sermons. We can't wait to meet you.
Let's join together and say the